All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Humanizing Your Brand webinar series presented by Online Optimism. I'm your host, Sam Olmsted, and throughout this series, you've learned how to connect with your audience, build trust with your customers, and grow your organization by creating a more human presence with a more personal touch. This is the sixth and final week of our webinar series, so I'm really pleased, and I want to thank everyone who participated so far. We've learned so much, from analytics to qualitative research to telling a story, really kind of tied everything together. So I'm really excited about this final speaker series. Each week we've featured industry-leading experts who have proven track records and provide insider tips that help reshape your brand and core messaging. Before we get started today, let's discuss the format of the webinar. Each speaker will present for about 20 minutes, and we'll have a 20-minute Q&A after both presentations are complete. So please feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A chat at the bottom of the screen. Everyone is muted, all the attendees are muted, so we won't be asking questions aloud, but after the presentations are complete, I'll read those questions aloud and really try and have a discussion that involves everyone. So as your host, I've muted everyone, as you can tell, and throughout this webinar, to cut down on noise, just want to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to ask those questions in the chat. Last thing is, we'll be posting a recording of this webinar online, and we'll make it available to everyone afterwards. So let's get started. As I said, this is our sixth and final week of our Humanizing Your Brand webinar series, and I'm pleased to introduce our first speaker today. Joe Koufman is responsible for introducing 3 married couples and countless business relationships. In 2014, he parlayed his passion for connecting people to found Setup, which is a marketing matchmaker. Setup connects brands with capable and compatible marketing agencies by assisting brands in finding the right agency to meet their needs at any given time. When Joe isn't working, he loves to discover new music. He hosts a weekly radio show, gumboshow.com, and spend time with his wife, Michelle, and their twins, Joss and Radley. So take it away, Joe.
Thank you so much, Sam. And I want to thank Flynn and Sarah and Sam and the rest of the Online Optimism team for putting on this series and also giving me the honor of being able to help wrap up the series this week. The Humanizing Your Brand idea is one that's really important to me because we're all humans and we need to really take care of not just being thoughtless marketers, but really being conscious of our brands. So let me go ahead and share my screen and we can jump into the presentation here. Okay, hopefully you see my screen. Okay. So I'm going to talk to you today about finding an agency that can help you humanize your brand. And I'm going to give you a quick agenda just so that we know what we're talking about today. So first, I'm going to tell you a little bit about my background and what led me to this opportunity. We'll talk about matchmaking in general, a little bit about Setup, just to give you some context for the discussion. We'll talk about how you plan for a marketing agency. Then we'll discuss the agency selection process. How do you onboard an agency once you've made that choice? And Setup does an annual marketing relationship survey. And this is the 3rd year we've done the survey. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that survey with some key insights that are relevant to this agency selection process. And then we'll wrap it up by talking about how you can take the next step in applying what I'm going to talk about today. I know that's the way we've wrapped up every Humanizing Your Brand conversation. So I'm going to start with a little bit about my journey. I was raised in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, graduated from Wake Forest University there. And right after college, I moved to the hometown of Online Optimism, New Orleans, Louisiana. I spent 4 years there working in retail management. And Eddie Bauer moved me from New Orleans to Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which was not a bad gig. A lot of outdoor activities, and really enjoyed my time there. But then Eddie Bauer moved me to Atlanta, Georgia, to run the largest store in the Southeast. And so I did one holiday season there and decided to get out of retail forever, hopefully, and joined a .com called Knowledge Storm. And I spent the next 8 years there. And our largest competitor went public in 2007, raised 130 million in their IPO, and then bought Knowledge Storm for 58 million. And that's when I joined a full service but digitally focused agency called Engage. And I spent 6 years there running business development and marketing before we were acquired by Publicis Group, the massive holding company, and merged together with Moxie. So as soon as that happened, I started what was originally called Agency Sparks. And then in August of 2019, we rebranded to become Setup. So the company today is Setup. And I'm going to show you a very brief video that just talks about that transition from Agency Sparks to Setup. And then we'll move on to the rest of the conversation. So as you saw in the video, we're marketing matchmakers. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about matchmaking. There's romantic matchmaking and there's business matchmaking or professional matchmaking. And in some ways, they share some common traits. So the two, I would say for romantic matchmaking, it's compatibility and chemistry. In business matchmaking, it may be more like capability and chemistry. So some of the elements that make up capability are that do you have shared goals and values and likes and dislikes? And are you close enough proximity wise to be able to interact with each other? And do you share some similar demographics of some kind? And then on the chemistry side, it's really more a question of, is there a spark there? So do you share similar emotional intelligence and personality and temperament and general vibe? And of course, there's always attraction. So if you think about the capability or compatibility is on paper, is it a good match? And then the chemistry is in person, are there sparks, right? Do sparks fly? So Sam mentioned in the introduction that there are 3 couples that I've introduced who married as a result of my connecting them. The couple in the middle is actually from New Orleans. I connected them in New Orleans, but they're not all still married. Not my fault. I never said that I was a marriage counselor. I said we were matchmakers. So just 2 slides about Setup, I think, or 3 slides about, a couple slides about Setup. Setup exists to connect and empower marketers because we're better together. And in practice, what that means is that Setup is a matchmaker that often matches marketers with qualified marketing agencies and also other resources as well. So again, we live in that space between the brands and the agencies, really working hard to try to get them together. Brands are often looking for qualified agencies that can fill gaps. And we'll talk a little bit about those gaps in a minute, but there are often gaps in either capacity, where they don't have enough arms and legs to do the work that they need to do from a marketing perspective, or chemistry, where they're just missing some specific, it's either capacity or it's capability. They're missing some specific skill that the agency provides that they don't have in-house. So here's a quick quote from a client that leveraged setup to find an agency. Sometimes marketing organizations within companies are missing capacity or a specific capability. Setup saved us time and resources by connecting us with a well-vetted marketing agency that could function as an extension of our team. So Tim formerly ran marketing at Carrier, the air conditioning company. And we actually connected him with an agency that they hired called Moto. So here's a quote from the CEO of Moto. Setup put our agency through a rigorous vetting process that uncovers insights about our core competencies. Since then, they have been introducing us to top brands that need precisely what we offer, which has resulted in several new clients. So we primarily work with larger brands, helping them connect with agency support that can either fill those capacity or capability gaps. In some cases, they're looking for an agency of record relationship for the agency to do everything. And in some cases, they're looking to an agency to as a specialist to do one specific discipline. All right, so enough about setup. I'm going to move on to the process of finding and onboarding an agency. So the first thing you need to do when you're preparing for finding the right agency is there's some homework you have to do up front. The three things I would recommend you do before you even get started is mapping out your business objectives. What are the KPIs you're trying to achieve that you think that marketing could help you solve? And then assessing the internal team. Who's good at what and who's bad at what? If you're really strong in a couple of disciplines within your team, those may be areas that you don't choose to go get external help from. So it's really important to know what your internal capabilities are before you try to seek external support. And then obviously just identifying those gaps. Are they gaps in capacity or capability? And then we're going to help you find an agency that will solve for that gap. So there are kind of three primary reasons why brands will hire marketing agencies. We talked about missing capabilities. So either you need help with strategy and guidance, or there's a specific skill set that you're missing, or there's an emerging trend, because agencies often stay on the pulse of everything that's happening in marketing, all of the newer trends. And then sometimes agencies are experts at a specific group of people or a specific industry, and so you tap them because of their expertise there. The second reason that often brands will hire a marketing agency is a lack of capacity. And again, this is the internal team is stretched too thin, or there's a short-term project. So for example, you may not have all of the resources to do a website redesign and rebuild in-house. So you might hire an agency to just take on that specific project. And then the third reason is when the previous agency is just not living up to expectations or meeting the expectations of the client. So sometimes that means communications problems. Sometimes it's just the lack of understanding of the brand. Sometimes things get stale. Disputes over fees, which often is the result of maybe a misscoping projects by the agency. And then sometimes they're just not performing that well. And one of the resources that we provide is there are two different versions of an agency scorecard. And one version is a scorecard for existing agency relationships so that the brand or client can evaluate those agencies over time to ensure that they're still feeling the love. The other version of that scorecard is as you're selecting a new agency, if you're considering multiple agencies, how do you differentiate between the different potential solutions, potential agency partners? And then sometimes there's even a conflict of interest that arises where there's another client that's in the same category, and it's just, you have to find a new partner. And then personnel changes are really common, where when the CMO leaves and a new one comes in, often that new chief marketing officer wants to bring in an agency that they are familiar with or that they feel could perform better than the one that was there in place already. So when hiring a marketing agency, there are a lot of different financial arrangements in terms of how the agency gets paid. And I'm going to just go through a couple of them here, because when you're selecting a marketing agency, you may want to consider the different models to see which one might be the right fit for you. So the first one is a project-based fee. That'd be like the web design example I gave, where the client might have a specific budget to redo their website, and it costs what it costs, regardless of how many hours it takes or how much work it takes. That's how much they're willing to devote to rebuilding their website. A retainer is usually a monthly fee with a bucket of hours, a pool of hours, and a dedicated team that consistently works on that client's business each month. And the value of that is that you build up some institutional knowledge within the agency to really know the client, know the challenges they're facing. And it makes for much better alignment from all of the key performance indicators and goals that the agency is trying to accomplish alongside the client. There are also time and materials relationships where you're just paying as you go. So the more hours the agency consumes on your behalf, the more you pay, but it's based on the time and materials. Performance-based relationships are based on, like I said, performance, but they're often tied to the volume and quality of leads that are generated, or sometimes are even tied to sales for the organization. And then finally, there are media relationships that are just a percentage of the spend, and they're paid to the agency a fee as a percentage of spend for the management of the spend. So these are the kinds of relationships that often agencies and brands have from a financial perspective. I'm going to talk a little bit about the selection process and the different entities or players that can help you as a brand select the right agency that will help humanize your brand. So there are search consultants that are paid by a client to run a request for information process, and then a request for proposal process, and then a pitch process. And that often results in the selection of an agency. And this is where the search consultant is an advocate and sort of part of the team, an extension of the team that's on the client side. You could do an internet search. The challenge with internet searches is that the results are not very curated and can be quite messy. So that's one way to do it. There are agency aggregator sites as well as directories. And an example would be clutch.co or Agency Spotter. And those are sites that you would use to select a long list of agencies, and then you would have to narrow it down from there. Referrals, many clients will look to referrals, either internal referrals from the team or external referrals from colleagues that either they used to work with or that are working, peers that work at other companies. And then finally, setup is a different approach in terms of helping a client find an agency. And the analogy I use is that if the agency aggregators or directories or internet search is sort of like Expedia or Orbitz or one of the large travel aggregators, and setup is more like a travel agent that really knows the client's wants and needs and where, what they really, it's more of a concierge kind of service. So there are two types of agencies that often people consider. There are generalists and there are specialists. So I'm going to talk about some of the variables that would cause one to choose a generalist versus a specialist. So with a generalist, you get big picture thinking often because they're holistically looking at your business. You get the efficiency of a single partner. It's one partner to manage, one quote neck to choke, but it's also efficient to have one flow of communication versus having to manage multiple agencies. And there can be accountability with having that single neck to choke within a generalist. The challenge is that sometimes a generalist can be a, quote, jack of all trades, but master of none. And so you don't always get that discipline expertise that you get with a specialist. Also, often with a specialist, the client is made a priority. And what I mean by that is that sometimes with a generalist, they have lots of different agencies and they're all kind of ranked in terms of importance. And so some of the smaller clients get lost in the shuffle. Whereas with a specialist, usually the types of clients that they work with are all fairly equally important. And often with a specialist, there's a little less bloat because it's a leaner organization focused on discipline expertise. And we've found that roughly 83% of clients prefer specialists of some kind or looking for specialized capabilities, whether that's within a generalist agency or a specialist, but they're looking for discipline expertise. Okay, so how do you actually go about selecting the partner? And this is one path, and I'll talk about an alternative path in a minute, but usually you create a selection committee. Who are the people within the client organization, the brand, who are going to be part of that decision-making process? What are the criteria by which the client is going to choose which agency ultimately they work with? Finalizing a schedule of events. What's the time frame that you're going to make the decision process in? And then what's the time frame that you need to have specific work executed? And then you can work backwards from there. And then usually there's a creation of an actual RFP document, request for proposal. There are different processes from this, but this is, again, one process. And then sending that request for proposal out to a list of agencies that have been identified as being expert at the thing that you need most. Okay. So there are some alternatives to the RFP process. One alternative is what I'll call the discovery RFP, where you actually select an agency just to do the discovery and uncover all of the unknowns. And then once those unknowns are uncovered, then you could either hire that agency to do all of the execution work, you could hire a different agency to do the execution work, or you could decide to do it in-house. The second option is a sample project where you award a project with the goal of giving the agency much more work if they deliver well on that smaller project. And then the third is just to leverage a third party to help you make the selection without going through the sometimes burdensome and RFP process. Okay, so now you've chosen your selected agency. How do you onboard them? And before we go into that detail, I want to talk about some of the roles within the client and the brand and the roles within the agency. And you'll see some similarities in the roles, but there's some nuances to the type of role that's on the client side versus the agency side. So there's an executive sponsor who ultimately is responsible for the larger big picture. That's usually a chief marketing officer or VP of marketing, something like that. There's a marketing leader who sort of runs the day-to-day relationship between the agency and the client and the brand, but also they manage the team, the internal team, and the people that are doing all of the execution. So those people are the functional specialists. So they may be an email marketer or a social media or content marketer or a web designer or PR person, something like that. And then on the agency side, there's usually an executive sponsor who is ultimately responsible for the overall relationship with the client. And then there's an account manager whose primary role is to be the advocate for the brand within the agency and to maintain that relationship and make sure that the agency is delivering on the expectations of the client and to make sure that they are hitting the KPIs that the agency and client have agreed to together. And then the project manager's job is to manage the internal resources within the agency to make sure that the agency executes on its promises on time, on budget, okay? And then finally, there are the functional specialists who are doing the work. These may be creatives, these may be developers, these may be business analysts or art directors or search engine optimization experts. So these are the specialists that are executing the work. So client and agency roles all work together to build a really strong, hopefully, relationship between the agency and client. There can be issues. This is from one of our past marketing relationship surveys. 88% of clients claim to speak their minds freely, even when it's uncomfortable, but only 36% of agency marketers agree that they are candid, that the clients are candid with their needs. Average agency client relationship lasts less than 3 years, and about 2/3 of both clients and agencies say that they're not quite on the same page when it comes to the shared definition of what really creativity is. And so those are some gaps that need to be bridged between client and agency. And this is part of what we explored with the marketing relationship survey, which we'll talk about in a minute. So some of the problems that prevent, ways you can prevent issues is by hitting these problems head on. And so lack of shared understanding of internal dynamics. And what I mean by that is that often the agency people don't understand all of the dynamics. It could be politics, it could be budgeting seasons, it could be lots of different internal company dynamics that affect the work that the agency does for them. Uncertainty around the agency's true skill set. So sometimes agencies will say that they're good at everything when they're not. And so sometimes that gets them into trouble and gets the relationship in trouble. And sometimes there's not a real alignment around goals. The client's goal may be to sell more stuff, and the agency's goal may be to sell more agency services. Bait and switch. So often when an agency is pitching a client, they show their best team, the team that's best at presenting and winning the deal, but those aren't always the same people that are actually executing the work. And so there is sometimes a bait and switch where there's a presentation team, but then you never see them again. The really smart people that pitched the work are not the same people working on the business. And then shifting costs for unclear reasons. Sometimes this is a result of bad project management. Sometimes this is a result of bad scoping of projects where the agency says it's going to cost this much, but it turns out that it's going to be much more expensive. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the marketing relationship survey and a couple of insights that we got from there, and then I'll wrap things up from there with sort of some next steps for you. So again, each year we do this marketing relationship survey. We were fortunate that a couple of weeks ago, Ad Age featured the survey on their homepage and all their subpages and all their newsletters. And the big headline there was 1/3 of brands are considering changing agencies within 6 months. So we do find, because of all the reasons we already discussed, that those agency relationships can get stale, or there are changes of leadership or whatever, but almost 1/3 of clients are considering a switch right now. So who did we talk to? We talked to over 300 marketers, most of them on the brand side or client side. We had a nice mix between B2B, B2C kinds of businesses. And most of them were senior leaders, director level and above, at mostly larger companies. On the agency side, we had roughly 2/3 that were generalists, full service agencies, and roughly 1/3 that were specialist agencies. Again, here's the big headline: 30% are considering a switch in the next 6 months. So question is, how can agencies be better partners to the client? And it is kind of ironic that both agencies and clients want the same thing, but they don't always deliver. So both agencies and clients want transparent communication, and they want the agencies to really understand their business. Well, agencies want transparent, better communication, and brand partners who really listen and set very clear expectations. So there's clearly a communication gap that's happening that's resulting in some agency-client relationship, schisms. The other thing is that brands want more value for the money that they spend, but agencies think that the client's expectations don't align with their budgets. So something to consider. The other question that I want to answer for you is, what variables are most important when selecting a new agency? And we talked about this earlier. Clients are looking for chemistry, they're looking for creativity, they're looking for understanding of their business. What they're not looking at nearly as much is they don't care so much about awards and recognition. They don't care so much about the size of the agency. And certainly throughout COVID, but even before COVID, they care less about the physical location of their agency. We live in an age where agencies can produce amazing work for the clients, even without being just down the street. And so it is interesting that both brands and agencies value the same variables and both think that the same variables are responsible for how a client would make a selection of an agency partner, but they're in different order: chemistry, creativity, understanding of industry, professionalism, and client experience. The good news for agencies in these variables is that many of these variables they can control, right? You can control how creative you are, how professional you are. You can build understanding of the industry. It's harder to build client experience if you don't have it, but the other things you absolutely can control. They don't care as much about awards and recognition. Some do, but most don't. Okay, so I'm going to wrap it up with, how do you apply this, and where would you begin if you wanted to do this? And so we've actually built a resource that could be very useful, a number of resources, but there's one in particular that I'll point you to, which is the Complete Guide to Finding a Marketing Agency. This is a 42-page interactive PDF that is built like a workbook so that you can think through, how do you prepare for finding an agency? How do you find the agency? And then how do you onboard them? And when I say it's built like a workbook, it's got lots of open fields so that you can put in your specific needs, your specific KPIs, and it's to help you organize your thoughts as you're thinking through that agency selection process. So I would encourage you to go to setup.us/resources and look for the Complete Guide to Finding a Marketing Agency. And there are tools for you to help you be an expert at finding the right marketing agency. And then if you still need help, you can come back to Setup and we can help you find the right agency for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Sam, so that you can make an introduction to Flynn and we'll go from there.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Joe. It's wild how much goes into compatibility. And I think that just kind of knowing all those factors really is helpful moving forward, definitely. All right, well, everyone, please take this time. If you have any questions, feel free to put them in the Q&A chat. We can ask them at the end of the presentation. So I'll give you a few moments while we prep for our next speaker. Okay, so thank you so much again, Joe. Next up, we have Flynn Zaiger, a CEO of Online Optimism. Flynn Zaiger spends his days keeping his employees happy, his clients happier, and the office pups happiest. After 6 months in the corporate world, Flynn decided to quit and start his own company, Online Optimism, in 2012, performing much needed internet marketing assistance to the many businesses in New Orleans. Over the years, that client base expanded to cover the Southeast, East Coast, and all over the country, while the team has grown from 1 person to 18 full-time employees in New Orleans and Atlanta. So take it away, Flynn.
Cool. Thanks, Sam. I'm really excited to talk to y'all today and go through kind of the culmination of this. So we've obviously talked a lot about how humanizing your brand helps your marketing, and Joe did a great job of talking about how it relates to agencies and picking agencies, but I wanted to give the kind of in-house perspective on why we believe that this is a good strategy for fighting marketing burnout and increasing retention. So just 20 minutes about. I'll give another brief introduction on why this is important to me and who I am, why it's important to your business. We're going to talk about how we suggest implementing it and why you should implement it, give some examples. I will talk about the very obvious downsides that everyone brings up when we mention that they should try this. Then we'll give you some next steps to put this into practice. So like Sam was saying, my name's Flynn. I've actually done digital marketing for 22 years. In case you're wondering, you look like you're about 22 years old. I'm a little older than that, but I helped my parents. They did a lot of the work very early on. They sold a lot of my stuffed animals and some Animorphs childhood book collections, which I've never been able to get back, on eBay. And I helped them, once they went on eBay, I kind of built an original site on Yahoo web stores, and I got good with computers is kind of what people would say. When I went to college and school, I kind of continued doing internet marketing, helped them on Amazon, Sears. They, of course, do all the actual work of handling orders and shipping. And I would just kind of come in every once in a while and just do a couple of things on spreadsheets or with HTML and help them out. When I graduated in 2012, like Sam was saying, I was what people say was good at internet stuff. And that was kind of a vague description, but it's what most people thought of because I was good with computers and I knew how to vaguely how the social media algorithms worked. I knew how search algorithms mostly worked, and I could work on those better than anyone. And so I figured I would start an internet marketing business because I was good at computers. And 8 years later, I barely deal with any of that. My job now, as Sam was saying, is to keep my employees happy. You can see our nice team in the bottom right. You can actually see both of the dogs that are here today, Frankie and Pims. So if you start hearing tails wagging under the table, it's actually them two over there. And that's really what I do. And that's why I wanted to give this presentation. My job is very little about digital marketing nowadays. My job is to ensure that our staff is happy and prevent their burnout and keep them motivated to stay optimists. So why do we want to talk about this for your company? Burnout is the biggest challenge that you likely face handling HR or just running an agency or any sort of company. This is actually a relatively old chart. We're going to get to some newer data in a second, but I liked showing this because it's not just a COVID issue. This isn't something that magically happened in the last year. Well, all of a sudden people are working from home, burnout's now trouble. This has been trending upwards for a long time. The top workforce management challenge growing since 2012 has been retention and turnover. More than recruitment or engaging succession planning, people leaving your organization because they don't see a future there is a major issue for companies. And burnout's real. So like I was saying, here's some more recent data. 61% of workers in the US are experiencing burnout at work. For those of you who talk to people, it's probably no surprise, especially in the past couple of years, that it actually affects women more than men. And I love that chart in the bottom right because you very much hear it all the time that burnout is a millennial or a Gen Z thing. I know I'm not the right person to talk about that. I'm clearly in that audience, but it does affect everyone. You know, baby boomers 55 and up are experiencing burnout. It's not that fairy tale where baby boomers just want to work for a pay job. They don't care about benefits. They don't care about happiness. They want to be happy at work and they deserve to be happy at work. And fighting burnout is essential to growing your business. It's not good, burnout. I just wanted to, there's a health side to it, excessive stress, fatigue, alcoholism, type 2 diabetes. There's actual causes. And from a moral standpoint, as a boss, as someone who works with your peers, colleagues who hopefully you respect, you shouldn't want them to not experience that. But I understand capitalism is a thing, you know, we have to deal with that too. So even if you don't care about your employees' health, it does affect things. I'll get to that in a second. I did want to show that digital, it is usually worse. This is a random search for social media managers on my Twitter feed. You can find 3 people. I didn't search negative social media managers. I didn't search what's wrong, but you can see how difficult the life of our digital team is. Whether it's they're not getting paid enough or they're doing multiple roles, it's pretty tricky. So it's hurting people's physical health, hurting people's mental health, and again, if you're very capitalistic, it is hurting economic health as well. American Institute of Stress, which honestly sounds like a great place to work, estimates that job stress costs U.S. industries more than $300 billion a year. So doesn't matter if you actually care about people, which I would recommend. Caring about people is usually good for you and society. But if you don't care about their health, their physical well-being or mental well-being, care about how many dollars this is killing our economy. It's an important thing. and it's helpful to the business. I just love showing really recent data on why this is even more important, not only for the burnout, but for your company's success. The job market's about to get a lot more competitive. This is literally from an hour ago. The US economy is rebounding pretty darn well. It's adding 960,000 jobs. The unemployment rate fell to 6%, which would be high compared to a year ago, but we're on pace to have an incredibly strong summer, incredibly strong fall, assuming that the vaccine rollout continues and that everything stays safe and we listen to the experts. But you can see there from a staffer, best job market in 25 years. So if your staff isn't happy, they don't see a future, they're not motivated to stay with you, there will be other jobs available, or the alternative, as the New York Times loves saying, they could just YOLO and find elsewhere to go. They could just go afar, they could go on an adventure. And I will say from experience that you never want to hear the word YOLO in a workplace. It has never been used in a good context. And so if you're not worried about your staff being hired by other people, be worried that they will just burn out and run away to a beautiful pool, not answering your phone calls. It's a great description. Cool. So obviously important. How does humanizing a brand help reduce that retention, reduce the chance that they will YOLO themselves? So first off, it makes people happy. Being recognized, whether it's in ads or any content, is a significant, probably the biggest factor in keeping people happier when they're recognized at work. 82% of people say that they want recognition from their boss, from their peers, and promoting people in advertisements, showing them as the face of the organization is key to letting people see that you want them to represent your business. This was a survey of about 1,500 people in 2019. Not only does it keep them happier, but it keeps them thinking long term. So around 2/3 of respondents to the same survey said public recognition had some impact on their ability to get a raise or promotion. So this is key. People want career growth. They don't want to stay in the same position for 20 years getting cost of living raises. They want to feel that there's a future for them and that there's growth. And if they don't see that future for themselves, they're not going to stay in your organization very long. That's our UIs on the right. We give out trophies every year. It's a very millennial thing, I'm aware. But it is key that you want employees to feel recognized, and public recognition is key. And if you are doing a big marketing campaign or you're promoting people on the website, that is public recognition. People will be able to see that, their friends see that, their family goes to the website. It's really cool for them, and it helps them think, okay, this company is investing in me. I want to stay here long term. I just want to see what else they're doing with me. Lastly, as Joe was saying, it's pretty important about keeping your brand consistent and keeping your marketing funnels going. If you're using stock images on your ads, or you're using people who no longer work there, when those clients join your company, there's less of that chemistry because these are new people and they're wondering, hey, I clicked on an ad that featured someone. Why aren't I talking to that person? Chemistry is obviously, as he was saying, so important to organizations. And by featuring the same people that they will talk and will do the work on the campaign as the ones in your ads, it's a lot better, more consistent marketing funnel or flywheel or whatever you want to call it for a business. Two other things that I want to note, which are a little less about like burnout and aggression, and just more kind of timely, and I think that they are important to note, is that it helps fight imposter syndrome and microaggressions. A lot of people, or especially younger staff, like just don't feel, kind of feel like a kid in an adult's body. No one has the answers, but it's important to address those, and being featured and saying, look, this person is a leader at our agency. We want to show them on our ads. We want to show them in our content. It helps people feel more professional, helps them feel like they are being respected and listened to. And it's a really essential way to keep people happy and keep them motivated in a difficult, we're still remote. It's not easy to feel recognized when you're staring at a screen by yourself in a room for 8 hours a day. So being out there will help do that. And then lastly, a lot of organizations have a diversity, equity, inclusion. It's a big importance. And there's these ads from the University of Washington that kind of shows, by featuring staff that are celebrating different initiatives, you can emphasize those values in your recruitment. It's pretty important. I'll note you don't want to tokenize employees or just feature them for that specific reason, but it does help if you are doing certain initiatives, you can use staff. And I would strongly recommend that you make sure that you don't just use those staff for that one initiative. It's super important to feature them throughout, but it certainly can help. Cool. So some more examples of how it looks in real life. I actually saw one of the most amazing examples of this weekend. If anyone watched the Oscars, which was kind of weird, I don't know about that, but Google had an ad featuring a coder, a child of deaf adult, which won their own Googlers, Tony. And it was an incredible ad. I won't show the whole video because we're already in this, but I highly recommend if you're feeling like crying at work today, by all means, it would take 1.5 minutes. It's better than the beginning of Up and making you cry really quickly, super efficient. But it's an incredible story. It shows off the product and it shows off their own staff, gives them that human connection. Pretty sure that Tony is not leaving Google anytime soon. We also see this a lot on manufacturers and organizations that are producing. This is a Shinola Detroit ad, and it not only connects with these staff and lets them feel like they're involved, but it's a good customer story, right? Like these businesses to say, okay, I'm looking for American-made products. This is what I want. You also see it a lot digitally speaking. This is a good just LinkedIn ad, B2B. You want to be featuring staff. This isn't. And this is kind of a more modern, 5, 10, 15 years ago, you might not have seen tattoos on employees and ads, but this feels, they see here, they've thrown out the stuffy, thrown out the corporate. They want it to feel more humanized. And they want to be featuring those individuals who are, again, getting rid of imposter syndrome. They want to represent their brand. One of the best ways that I like looking at ads and seeing what happens when companies really need ads to work is looking at when companies are at their worst and how they address that problem. When a company is facing an existential crisis, they're not testing out ad campaigns. They're doing tried and true strategies to make things work. So let's look at companies at their worst. Fisher Investments is an organization where the CEO made some disparaging comments about women. And they had to bring out, they were like, what do we do? And they brought out their female employees to make that sort of case. I think that there's a lot of interesting connotations there, but I think that this is important to look at when this company was like, okay, how do we fight this story? And how do we make sure that our women staff feel valued despite what our CEO said in company culture? They featured their women staff. Agree or disagree with how it was, this was what they believed would be the most effective strategy. And you see that again when you're looking at other ways that companies are dealing with existential crisis, like unionization. So Lyft and Uber obviously were dealing with this in California, and their entire ad campaign promoting Yes on 22 featured staff, featured employees, or not employees, sorry, featuring drivers, clearly not employees at this point. So they featured all their drivers and emphasized that this is the future, and this is what you are voting against. And they wanted their staff not only to vote for this, but for these drivers to stay on board. And that's why they featured them. It goes back to everything we were talking about earlier. There's no imposter syndrome. It makes them happier to be recognized. Feels like they have a bigger future for promotions and opportunity, which is the whole case study of theirs. And you can see some more here on just more drivers. You can see a nice diverse group of drivers. So again, going back to that initiative of theirs. And then of course, the latest one is Amazon, whose campaign against their unionization was entirely featuring their staff. So whether or not you are pro or against those organizations doing it, I don't think anyone would disagree that Amazon and Lyft and Uber and Fisher all saw this as an existential crisis. They got all of the biggest brains in the room, got all the best consultants in the world, and the strategy they came up with was humanizing their brand. So why not you? Cool. There's obvious downsides to this. I'm pretty aware every time the first thing that people say is, I don't want to feature people because they'll be like ghosts if they ever leave me. It's true. I'm not going to tell you that it's not true. If you start featuring your staff in ads, unless you have a perfect 100% retention rate, which would be amazing, they're going to leave. And that's something I understand. And the other downside of this is that, you have somewhat less control. Papa John's, obviously the CEO, founder, was a little more important, but they featured him a ton in all of his ads. He was like the little mascot of them. And then he had a less than fabulous couple of years and not great ads. Don't look good in retrospect. They aged pretty poorly. My argument against that is that you should be changing your ads and content pretty consistently. These are stats about ad fatigue and content, but essentially you can see ads really only start working the first couple of weeks, and after 30 days, they have pretty significant fatigue. So if you're showing people more than 30 days after they left their company, those ads probably weren't working anyway, and you should be changing that. I always understand that people are busy. We usually recommend reviewing content ads quarterly. So for example, you're looking at it now, May, August, November, And then you can see February, a nice, beautiful Valentine's Day ad change is something that you could implement. It's a important thing to note. So this is why I'm never too concerned when people are like, I don't want to feature my staff. What if they leave? You should be changing your content frequently anyway. It shouldn't be that difficult. If you are super worried, neat trick is to just be a little creative with your angles. We actually have a specialist, which is a paid internship program. So we have staff constantly moving in and out because it's a 4-month program. You can see in the top left. Mira's an employee. The woman to the left is Brittany, great specialist. But unfortunately, she won't be with us for very long. And so we could take an ad that features a more higher level employee, take a picture of her, and then feature someone else in a little more blurred angle so that we feel, less bad for using that content. There's also, of course, just more creative angles. You can see in the top right, our growth team, including me, pretty small picture, we're pretty far away, so you can get the sense of the room without focusing on anyone, or you could, feature objects like our little "We're Feeling Peachy" mug in the bottom left, or just out of blurred focus like the bottom right. So again, you shouldn't be too worried about featuring staff simply because you should be changing your content often, but you can do certain creative things to keep that in mind if that is a fear of yours. Cool. So what are the next steps? First recommendation is talk to your staff. Say, hey, we're about to push out this ad campaign. We'd love to feature people. See if they're interested. You should never force people to do these ads, but I think you'd be surprised if you've never talked to them before about people want to be seen in the brand. Like I was saying, they want that recognition. It will make them happier. It makes them believe that they are more likely to get a promotion. Hopefully, maybe they are more likely to get a promotion. But they see that career growth better when you are featuring them. Create the media, photography, video, go out, take those pictures, and then promote it and celebrate them. Do what that LinkedIn ad was doing. Talk about your team and talk about how these are the people that you'll work on. And then check in quarterly. You shouldn't have these ads up forever. People will change, but you're dealing with ad fatigue anyway. So it's a pretty standard thing to want to change out this content frequently. And that's all I've got. So thank you for your time. We'll bring it back to Sam, and then we'll have some questions.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Flynn. That was great. I think we all know that burnout is definitely a real issue, and doing what we can to fix it. So thank you for that great presentation. And now is an official time for the Q&A chat. So if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat, and we'll be bouncing questions off of Flynn and Joe to get the conversation rolling here. So Joe, Flynn, feel free to jump in. If I ask one of y'all a question, feel free to make a comment. We definitely want to have a conversational style here. So, please participate. So, all right, we will get this going. First question I have is for Joe. Okay, so if I'm thinking about hiring an agency, what should I do after I assess my team and needs?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say the really important next step is to write a really good quality brief. And the brief is including background about the company, background about the team that you have in-house that does the work, past agency relationships or agencies that you're working with today. It would include budget. It's important to include budget in a brief because you want to know that the agencies that you're talking to can do the kind of work you need within that assigned budget. Technology constraints, like are you on certain platforms of technology? And then what are you trying to accomplish ultimately from a marketing perspective? That's super important to just be clear about what your expectations for good outcomes will be. And it's always a good idea on the agency side to ask the question, a year from now, when we've been working together for the last year, what will make you thrilled that you made the decision to hire us? But just when you're writing the brief, think through all of those things and document them before you even embark on the journey of going out and finding the agency, because that'll help guide you as to what kind of agency you might need and what you'd like for them to do.
Definitely, and just walking through that will just give you more clarity, I'm sure, just to understand, your needs. Perfect. Okay, let me look over here. All right, this one is to Flynn. So what are some signs of employee burnout that you can spot before they turn into a bigger problem?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's just general dissatisfaction and disengagement. So if there's cultural events that you're doing at your office, you can usually see if people feel that they are too busy with work. And that's something that we really I personally am still working on. We do weekly happy hours, and a lot of times that was actually was a time 1 or 2 months ago when we were trying to do a Friday happy hour, and like our staff was focused on it because we talk about burnout a lot, and our specialists, our interns were like working through it, and they're like, we have too much work to do. We can't, we can't join your happy hour. And so I think it does start from the top up. I know early on in the pandemic, I sent out a message to all of our team, was like, hey, this is my vacation. You all need to take vacation. Like, you don't have to. We'll compensate you if you have vacation days at the end. But like, it's making sure that they're taking time off, making sure they're participating in the cultural events, and that they are, that they're looking for ways to change, especially in COVID. It's really easy to feel stagnant. You wake up, you roll out of bed, you go sit at the computer for 8 hours, and you want to keep giving people new challenges. It doesn't mean that you should burn them out on too many challenges, but you want to keep them engaged, and coming up with interesting ideas is really key.
Definitely. Joe, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, I once had a person that worked for me that it was clear that that person fundamentally distrusted and did not believe in marketing. And they felt that marketing was kind of a way to trick people into buying things that they don't want. And that's something she made it clear that this just wasn't the best place for her. And she disengaged, and it was a sign that it just wasn't the right place for her. And she's extremely happy where she is now, not in marketing.
I think that's something that's key, is that if employees are burning out, it's nothing personal against you. It's just not the right fit. Like, there's terminations and people leaving. It's kind of like it's like a divorce. Like, it's not bad. Like, you're not happy. There's a better place to be. The event itself isn't great, but it's better for you to be somewhere where you feel that you're reaching your potential. It does suck at the moment. Don't get me wrong. When people, but it's better long term, and that's what you have to consider.
No, and I do agree though with Flynn with a lot of things that you said about cultivating a place that people want to be. It's not about trapping people in their job. It's about enticing them to be engaged and keeping them engaged. So I appreciate that, all of those points.
Absolutely. All right, Joe, I got one more for you. This one, I really enjoyed this question. What disciplines should clients always keep in-house versus outsourcing to an agency?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's no hard and fast answer, but I think generally clients have certain things that are core to their business that you would never want to outsource. So I think strategy and general industry knowledge is something that you can't necessarily outsource to an agency. You can hire an agency that's good at a certain category or industry, but generally it is very expensive and inefficient for a brand to have a specialist for every single specialty on staff. To hire a specific, unless you're a giant company, to hire somebody that is good at each single discipline is very difficult. The value of hiring an agency is that they employ a variety of different specialists that can be tapped on a fractional basis depending on need. So I would say, you hire an agency for the discipline expertise that they bring to the table in a specific, and by that I mean it could be email marketing, it could be content creation, it could be PR, it could be video production, whatever it is. If that's not core to who you are as an organization, find help from the outside with an agency that can afford to have a variety of different specialists that are great at that thing.
Yeah, and completely agree with Joe. I think that one of the main questions, in addition to what you were saying earlier with, what does success look like? What would make you love us at the end of these 12 months of this partnership is really just how often are we communicating? An agency is never, you're not in the office with them 24 hours a day. Like, you'll never have that intrinsic knowledge of the company. but you want to make sure that you're talking to them enough that that knowledge is passed along as well as it can. And so those are really the two key questions that, I mean, even on our side, we want people to ask us, because if you don't have the right communication, you don't have the right goals, nothing else matters.
All right, we've got our last question here that I want to ask. I'll ask it to Flynn, but I think Joe could definitely jump in here. How do you suggest we incorporate staff who are working remotely, and how do we do that? You touched on it a little bit, Flynn, but I just want to let you expand on it.
Yeah, I think it's shockingly easy to bring media into to create media at home nowadays. I'm actually not. If you have a cell phone that you bought in the last 3 years, you have an incredible camera that could do amazing work with a tripod and a ring light, which is a $30 investment that is worth sending to any staff who's willing to be in your photography, because one stock photo will literally cost you $30. So it's worth that investment. I'm actually, if you're saying, wow, that guy's on a blurry camera to be saying that, it's because I'm on a webcam from my laptop. I like it blurry because it reduces the blemishes. It's a good look. But I think it's incredible what a simple, how good the cameras on our phones are, and just some basic conversations. Do like a 30-minute or just YouTube, how to frame pictures or photography, and make it fun. Send staff some little gift packages, be like, here's some notebooks, here's some goodie bags. But having staff self-produce their own photos with selfies or anything else is, that's what's authentic. We've talked about that in the past couple of weeks, but people just want to feel that there's humans behind a business, and people can do that from home with very simple, relatively cheap technological gifts, essentially.
And I'll say, just with all of the tools that we use to communicate these days, it's very easy, to transition to work from home environment, from office environment. It's been seamless. We were already using Slack every day. We were already using Asana and project management tools. We were already using, various digital tools, to Zoom and Google Meet, to stay connected. And we've proven through this pandemic that remote work is, productive. And, my company will be more of a hybrid company in the future, where there'll be a couple of days where we have everybody come into the office and be able to see each other physically in person. But then there's also going to be flex days where people can make the choice to come in or not. And that flexibility was born out of the pandemic, but I think it will persist beyond it.
Absolutely. I think that kind of this idea of the remote work revolution was happening for a long time, and then it really got switched on. So very interesting. All right, well, that wraps it up with our Q&A session. I want to give another special thanks to our speakers, Joe Koufman and Flynn Zaiger. Again, Joe Koufman is the founder of Setup, an organization that connects brands with capable and compatible marketing agencies. So I'll let him tell you a little bit more before we kind of do a final close here.
I'll just say, if you want to see the complete guide to finding a marketing agency that I mentioned during my presentation, you can go to setup.us/resources. And there's that guide there, but there are also the scorecards I mentioned and some other tools. And those would be really useful if you're considering finding an agency that will help humanize your brand.
Absolutely. Awesome. So go check it out. Go follow his company online. Go
Yes.
see the social
Setup,
media.
sorry, Sam. Setup says on all of our social platforms. Setup
Okay,
says. Yeah.
Thanks so much. All right. And then lastly, Flynn Zaiger is the founder and CEO of Online Optimism, a full service digital marketing agency with offices in New Orleans and Atlanta. You can find our organization at onlineoptimism.com or on Twitter at Online Optimism. So again, this is the last of our 6-part series called Humanizing Your Brand. I want to thank each and every one of our speakers over the past 6 weeks, from looking at analytics to video production to storytelling. I know that I personally learned a lot, and I hope you all did too. So again, thank you, and hope you can all humanize your brand. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks. Bye, all.
Thank you.